At issue this week, the House of Commons has risen and MPs are getting ready for a summer of campaigning. The Liberals will be trying to close the significant gap with the Conservatives, a gap the Prime Minister is already downplaying.
Canadians are not in a decision mode right now. What you tell a pollster if they ever manage to reach you is very different from the choice Canadians end up making in an election campaign.
So what will Liberals be focused on this summer? How important is that Toronto by-election on Monday for the campaign ahead? Hello, I'm Rosemary Barton, and this is At Issue. Let's bring in everybody. Chantal Hebert, Coyne, Althia Raj. I just want to start with that clip that the Prime Minister gave to my colleague David Cochrane about how Canadians aren't in decision mode right now. Althia, what did you make of that comment and what it says about where his thinking is at?
That he's not really listening. I mean, they may not are, most Canadians, except for the residents, obviously, of Toronto, St. Paul's, are not marking their ballot anytime soon. But for more than a year now, pollsters have reported that 80% of the country wants change. And, a significant chunk aren't really sure who to vote for. But they seem to suggest that they're looking for a party that's not the Liberal Party. And if he's still thinking that people are not, facing a decision, he's probably not preparing well. The thing that struck me from that interview with David Cochrane was when your colleague asked, what is it that's left to accomplish on a fourth term? And frankly, the Prime Minister had no answer. Oh, it's continuing to meet the moment for Canadians? What does that mean? That is not a message that Liberals can go to the doors with over the summer. And frankly, the problem with a lot of caucus at the moment is they seem completely resigned to be swallowed up by a blue wave. There is no hunger, and there is no message coming from the centre telling them what they should be saying at the doors. So except for a few, there are a few who are hungry, there is a complete resignation on the part of most Liberal MPs.
Okay, so Chantal, what given that, what should we be watching for beyond Monday? Obviously, Monday is important, but what else?
Well, Monday is important, and in a French interview, the Prime Minister seemed to be suggesting that a win on Monday in Toronto, St. Paul's would set a pattern for maybe what is to come. That really doesn't work in the sense that Toronto St. Paul's is a Liberal riding, it should be a safe Liberal riding. Yes. Mm-hmm. But it's not the typical riding that elections are won or lost in. What I'm going to be watching for, picking up on what Althia just said about resignation and going to the slaughterhouse together, is how many MPs use the summer, and one apparently has just done so in Toronto, to say, I'm not reoffering. I'm not going to be a candidate in the next election. I think the Liberals are waiting for events to turn their way rather than trying again, and they failed all spring to take control of the narrative. Those two events they're looking for is an improvement in the economy, may or may not happen in a way that changes voters' minds, and what happens to the U.S.-American election in the fall.
It's the Liberal MP John McKay just announced today he's not reoffering, but I thought it was partly because of redistribution, because the map is going to change and a lot of people don't like their chances. But sure, it's also because if you see that things are going to be harder, maybe you don't want to do it. Andrew, what are you going to keep an eye on here?
Well, look, there can be some truth in what the Prime Minister said. There are occasions when you look at the polls and you say people aren't really focused. I think to reinforce or take a slightly different thing from Althia's point, if there's anything that's more baked in than the party standings, it's what people think of the Prime Minister. And this is often the way that people make up their mind about the leader first, and then that bleeds through into the party standings. And before the big divergence between the Conservatives and the Liberals that happened last summer, you were already seeing very bad numbers for the Prime Minister, and they've only gotten worse since then. So that's one impediment for them in trying to make a comeback. The second that was also mentioned was, what's the reason? What's the proposition you're putting before the public? What would you do with that next term? And there, I think they run into the difficulty that they've got to figure out what is the direction. Do we try to round up the left in the usual Liberal strategy? Go hard on NDP issues, tell people how scary the Conservatives are, try to get the NDP voters back in their tent. The problem with that, I mean, they've used it before, but they've really run that play this time. And where are they at? They're at 22% of the polls.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more room to their right, to the center, that they so far have not exploited. It would be a long shot that they could pull those voters back in. But to the extent that there's still doubts about Pierre Poilievre in particular, those voters, I would suspect, are more reachable than the voters to their left. But it may require, as a last point, it may require that you change leaders, that it may be that people have just so tuned him out now that they're not going to be able to reach those voters.
And we're going to talk about Pierre Poilievre in the next block, just so people know he's getting his own time. Chantal, you wanted in there?
I agree with Andrew that to make a move towards the right, you probably need a leadership change. I don't believe that Justin Trudeau can reach out to that constituency over the summer. But I also don't think that it's going to happen over the summer. Why? Because Canadians are sane and they know that the summer is short and they're not going to be sitting asking themselves, on this, Justin Trudeau is right, they're not going to be sitting asking themselves, how am I going to vote in maybe a year or a year and a half? But, and that's why that Monday by-election is so important, because I don't believe that if the Liberals win it, it means that the Liberals can win another election. But I do believe that if they lose it, it means that they don't have a shot under this leader.
It's interesting, Althia. Yeah, it's interesting, Althia, because I have had Liberal MPs say to me they have the impression that Canadians are tired of seeing Justin Trudeau, but that some of the policies that are in the window are still attractive to Canadians. So there's like a coherence problem for them in terms of what they're trying to sell.
And maybe if you replace the leader, the thinking goes, according to some of them, that that would give him a better shot. Andrew mentioned the Liberals are at 22%. That's just 3% higher than what Michael Ignatieff got in 2011. Like, that is really, really bad. And if they lose on Monday, there will be finally a movement within caucus to actually make the case to Mr. Trudeau that he should go for the good of the country and the party. There isn't that
Not
feeling at the
that
moment.
order.
Well, I mean, this is what some people are saying, because frankly, they will all say it to you privately. I'm sure, Rosie, they tell you privately, but they're not saying it in caucus because they're afraid that if they put their neck out, they're headed towards the guillotine. So they are not saying what I think needs to be said to the Prime Minister about the feelings in their riding. You know, for all this talk he had in 2015 about you are your riding's voice in Ottawa, well, he's not asking them what the riding is saying in Ottawa. And they seem completely out of touch. Like, the Liberal caucus has decided to meet, they will meet in September, in Nanaimo. The Liberals have never won Nanaimo. What is the message about going to Nanaimo? It makes no sense. Like, this is the strategic. It's a nice place to go. It's a beautiful place, but it is far. It is expensive. It is a seat they will never win. This is a seat that has gone, Conservative NDP. It will. All these Liberal MPs going to Nanaimo will open themselves up to criticism that they're wasting all this greenhouse gas emissions to get there. It makes no strategic sense why they're meeting in Nanaimo. This is one example of so many little things that has a lot of people in caucus scratching their heads.
Okay, quickly, Chantal, then I got to take a break.
It is maybe the last chance for so many of them to get to Nanaimo in nice weather. One, on the eve of a provincial election in BC where there is no Liberal name on the ballot.
Yeah.
Even more interesting.
Yeah. 10 seconds, Andrew.
I'd just say he needs to make up his mind soon. If you're going to go, best to go now to give the party time to choose another leader. There's an argument for staying, but the argument for staying is better to lose under the old leader than taint the new leader.
I think he's made up his mind, for the record. It's whether other people can convince him to change his mind. But, okay. At issue, the Conservative summer. The Tories are dominating the polls, so much so that Pierre Poilievre is going on the offensive in ridings the party thinks they can win over, including just last night in Montreal.
Justin Trudeau, with the help of his Liberal servants like Anthony Housefather, have tripled the rent.
So what are the plans for the Conservatives this summer? How can they capitalize on their lead in the polls? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Chantal, I'll start with you because this is a very specific sort of week-long concentration that Poilievre is doing in Quebec, and some of the ridings he's going to, I think, kind of telling because they're places where it's possible they could win. What do you make of his strategy for that province?
I'm as fascinated by the places he doesn't go to as the places he's going to. So Mount Royal. where he was last night, is a riding that Stephen Harper used to dream about. They kept back in the Harper days saying, we're going to win a riding on the island of Montreal. It's going to be Mount Royal. Why Mount Royal? Because it is the riding with the highest proportion of people who are from the Jewish community on the island of Montreal. And they believe, again, that they have an opening there because of the Palestine-Israel conflict and the fact that the conservatives are more aligned with Israel on the issue. What I found interesting is that there will be a vote on the island of Montreal in a by-election just next door in La Salle-et-Mort, where David Lametti left the place vacant back in January. So there will be a vote in a riding on Montreal Island in September, probably. But that is not where Mr. Poilievre is going. The other interesting part is if you look beyond that riding, the one last night and the one in Trois-Rivières, he's mostly going to seats that the Conservatives already have. And what fascinated me is he's not spending the weekend in Toronto-St. Paul's, where there's actually a vote on Monday.
Yeah. I wonder, though, the fact that he's spending time in Quebec, I mean, I know obviously that's important to any party, but for the Conservatives has been challenging. And I wonder whether that gives us a sense of how confident he is about how he's doing in other places too, Andrew, that he can go and spend some concentrated time there.
Yeah, a lot of times it's not necessarily about Quebec, it's about other places. So one of the things you do to win in Ontario is show that you're credible in Quebec, that you can at least win a few seats in Quebec. And then once Quebecers see you doing well in Ontario, then maybe they'll give you another look. So there's always this kind of two-step. I suspect Chantal may be right that part of this is not going to Toronto-St. Paul's. But look, the main thing he's got to accomplish is look more like a prime minister and less like an attack dog. We know he can do the attack lines. We know he can rile up his faithful on that. They love him for that. But if he wants to really lock this down, he's got to get the people who are sort of with the Conservatives, but mostly against the Liberals. And so I think some of that time this summer would be well spent looking a little more likable, a little bit more prime ministerial. He's done quite well in the last couple of weeks. He's had a couple of good moments on things that might have been quite challenging. One was the Arnold Viersen, the MP, who said all those very, very socially conservative things to the Liberal on the Liberal podcast. Poilievre's statement on that was more than perfunctory. It was pretty firmly distancing himself from the social conservatives just in general. It was a pretty broad-ranging statement. And then secondly, on the capital gains tax, where he, I think, reassured perhaps some economic conservatives that he's not just going to be completely, populist all the way down, chasing every NDP vote he can find. That's good. He's starting to define himself a bit more as something other than just a pure political animal, as somebody who's got some substance to him, and I think he needs to do more of that.
Yeah, it's not a mistake that his wife is with him, Althia, on this RV trip, and his two children are in the RV plane and stuff. So, I think that they understand what Andrew's saying as well. What are you going to watch for from him?
Yeah, well, his wife is also a Quebecer, right? So she has been introducing him at convention, for example. She led the introduction for him. So I think Quebec is really interesting. It's the only place in the country at the moment where the Conservatives are third. So the Liberals are behind the Bloc Québécois. The Bloc Québécois is ahead. But they're basically nipping at the heels of the Liberals. And last summer, we saw the Conservative make inroads in Atlantic Canada. And they basically made up a 20% deficit. And then it became like they were ahead of the Liberals by 20 points. Okay. And the more Quebecers realize that actually Pierre Poilievre's French is quite good, and the more that they'd start turning to him and think like, okay, well, maybe if he's like going to be prime minister, we should have more MPs in his caucus. There should be more Quebec cabinet ministers. The greater this is obviously for the Liberals. The Liberals, this is the only firm place they have at the moment where they can kind of mount a comeback. So if they're destroyed in Quebec, there really is, where will the anybody but Pierre Poilievre vote go? It won't be clear. It won't be clear that it all rests with the NDP or it all rests with the Liberals. And that further kind of diffuses the center progressive vote across those parties. So I think it's strategically really important. The other thing to mention is, frankly, the Conservatives have so much money. they can
That's right, yeah.
afford
They can do this.
to
They can
go
rent
to
RVs.
ridings that they have no shot of winning. Like in the last 5 quarters, so 2023 in the last 3 months of first 3 months of this year, the Conservatives raised $46 million. That is $12 million more than they are legally allowed to spend in the next election. The Liberals, in comparison, raised $18 million, the NDP $8 million. They are swimming in cash. They can afford to do this.
Yeah, and you can spend as much as you want outside of the RIP period, Chantal. Yeah.
But if you do bring it back to Quebec, the problem is, one, the anti-Trudeau feeling is never as high here as it is in the rest of the country. Actually, a poll today suggested that there were more people who believed that François Legault, the Premier, is doing a poor job than people who believe Justin Trudeau is doing a poor job. So that kind of tells you something. I can understand why Mr. Trudeau would want to spend more time in Quebec over the summer. Also, a strong, up to a point, Conservative Party against a relatively strong Bloc Québécois is good for the Liberals in Quebec. They can use those three-way races to slip in between. It's not a bad thing for them. I also, Yves-François Blanchet pointed it out in a French interview, Mr. Poilievre is here this week, but Yves-François Blanchet, who only campaigns in Quebec, is going to be all over Quebec all summer. So I understand why Mr. Poilievre is campaigning and starting off in Quebec, but I do not believe that his victory or his majority will run through here.
No.
He doesn't even need any seats in Quebec. Like, if you look at the polls, he could win a majority government with 0 seats in Quebec.
Well, then that creates a whole other can of worms that would get us talking for weeks. Last word to you, Andrew.
Well, I'll just add that if the PQ continues to do well in Quebec, that may scare a few Federalist voters in Quebec back into the Liberal camp.
Yeah, that's the can of worms, the exact can of worms I was talking about. At issue, foreign interference. NDP MP Jenny Coyne is calling for a release of MPs named in the redacted NZCOP report.
We're all tainted with these allegations, and so it is absolutely essential, in my view, that we actually get at the truth.
But with the House gone for the summer, what developments can we expect when it comes to foreign interference? So, could we see those names? Might foreign interference fall out of the spotlight? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Andrew, I'll start with you. I mean, one of the reasons why Jenny Coyne, I think, has some credibility on this issue is that she herself has been, of course, the target of foreign interference. So she wants to know what's going on. Yeah. I think this is one of those stories, though, that as we head into the summer, runs the risk of fading away. So I wonder what you think will happen in the weeks ahead.
Well, in the weeks ahead, who knows? Probably not much. But look, the failure to name or to release the names does not mean that everybody's avoiding besmirching other people's reputations. It's maybe not by name, but what's been going on is you have Jagmeet Singh insinuating that there must be a lot of Liberal MPs that the Prime Minister is protecting and he's soft on interference. The Prime Minister in his turn then says, well, Jagmeet Singh, I'd be wary of any politician who makes that kind of claim about their own party being scot-free. People casting aspersions on the Tories, et cetera. So it's not like everyone's just playing above board here. People are, the reputations of Parliament in general are being besmirched, and I'm not quite sure why we're so protective in this particular case of not naming anybody who's been credibly accused of something. When it's another matter, if it was misappropriation of funds or whatever, there'd be parliamentary committees, the MPs involved will be called in front of it, they'd have a chance to clear their name or not, the evidence would be examined, people would see how credible it was or was not. I'm not so sure why we've had this all-party agreement at this point not to name anybody.
Yeah, but isn't that the key thing? Credible allegations? Like, we don't know that they're credible.
Well, no, but
I don't know.
What we know is that the committee appointed by the Prime Minister from all parties, people with deep backgrounds in law enforcement, in national security, et cetera, who spent months going through thousands of documents on this. I mean, that was the knock saying, let's not accept those CSIS reports that were leaked to the press. Yeah. Who knows how credible these were? Okay, so we have a committee look at it in depth, go through it, at the end of which they basically say, we think these allegations are credible. Okay. That doesn't mean you throw anybody in jail over it, but it does mean, it seems to me, that you turn over that rock and see what's under it.
Okay, Chantal.
I don't, fading away is not the same as going away.
Yes,
and I don't think the issue is going away, but I tend to think that we're now going to have to wait to see what Justice Ugg and the Commission on Foreign Interference makes of those in its final report. I understand what Andrew is saying, but I think by now we've come to a dead end here. Various MPs are saying the names should be named, but the party that is most calling for names to be named is the party whose leader will not read the report, the unredacted version. So it's kind of a comedy that is not meant to shore up confidence in Parliament or its members at this point, but I do believe we're going to have to wait now.
The least funny comedy ever. Althea, last word to you.
Just so clarification, the NSI COP committee, they're not appointed by the Prime Minister. They're chosen by their own party leaders,
The chair
and then
is
they
appointed,
get
though,
their
by the Prime Minister.
And so it's not like Justin Trudeau has like single-handedly picked the members of this committee. Sure. We don't know how credible the allegations are because we don't know what the language around the allegations were or the nature of what it was that they were targeting or how many people were targeted. Jenny Kwan has asked the Speaker of the House of Commons to rule on the question of privilege. So that will come back to the House of Commons in September when the House resumes. Her suggestion is for the Parliamentary Procedure Committee to look at this issue, which I find bewildering. If we are sending this back to a committee, it should go back to NSI COP because those people have been vetted and they actually know what the nature of the allegations are, and they can tell the House whether or not they think that the names should be released. And there are good reasons for not releasing the names, whether or not there's an RCMP investigation currently underway, whether it would sacrifice or compromise any intelligence gathering that is happening, what has happened to those, there's suggestion that they're former parliamentarians. Are those people currently being watched? Yeah. So there's a lot we don't know, but demanding sort of grandstanding that we should know this absolutely without having any of the context, I think is a little irresponsible.
Okay, I'll give Andrew 20 seconds to finish.
I don't think anybody's suggesting the names without the context. That's the point, is to have all the context, including the names. Right now, we're stumbling around in the dark. Nobody knows anything. Everybody's suspecting everyone. I don't think that's good for Parliament's credibility. I don't think that's good for the public trust in the democratic process. If we're going to go into an election not knowing who these candidates are, whether any of these people were involved, I don't think that's fair to the public.
10 seconds,
But when
Chantal.
Dick Fadden said this, years ago, there wasn't this whole, we must name names forever. So I think we need to, take a step back.
No, they're quite the
and
contrary.
let the process.
Everyone shouted him down and told him he should leave office.
Okay, quickly, Chantal. Quickly, Chantal, and then I got to go.
I still remain mind-boggled about the notion that the leader of the official opposition would not want to know what is happening within his own party since he gets to decide who runs for it.
Well, to be fair, he said he would like to be briefed by CSIS if they have specific information about his own MPs.
But it's not just CSIS. It's the RCMP. It's the Communication Security Establishment.
Andrew, you're defeating your own point.
Okay,
no,
all right.
you're defeating your own point. There are suspicions. There are people engaged in things that may not be unlawful. We need to know who they are. But the leader of the opposition doesn't need to know if they're in his caucus by reading the report.
The great news is we'll still be talking about this after our summer break. You've just all confirmed that. So thank you for that. Thank you all very much. That is At Issue. This is, as I said, our final panel for the summer, barring major news, because then I would call them, we'd talk, we'd negotiate. We will see you all in September when the House resumes, if not before. Thanks so much for watching.